So, I want to tell you a story. It's about me and my life as it is. My name is James Lewis Kennedy. Most people call me Jim. I have a mixture of Scottish and Irish roots. I like to think of myself as an intelligent and determined person. I have a strong work ethic and a well-developed sense of right and wrong. I generally don't put up with bullshit. My ancestors, if they could speak from the grave, would tell you about the determination of the Scottish people. Just look at the constant drive for independence that is still deep in Scotland today. My father was a man who did not put up with stupidity, and although he is no longer alive, I remember his lessons well. My mother is alive and well and lives in Arizona, far from the snow and rain of upstate New York. She lives with her sister, also a widow. I talk to her weekly. I have a younger brother and an older sister, but they are scattered across the country with their own families and busy lives. Now back to my dilemma. You see, a few months ago I discovered that my lovely wife of 9 years, Laura Grosvenor, had been seeing other men, yes, plural, for the past 4 years. It seems that one day she decided that I wasn't a good enough husband for her, and her needs exceeded what I could provide. I'm not one to cry into a beer, so I decided I needed information. And I got the information. From two sources. First source, an investigator. I paid to investigate my wife's extracurricular activities. For my $2,500, I received confirmation that my wife was having weekly intercourse with another man, with a guy named Jason McDonald. She was having fun with him, or he with her, at hotels, houses my wife was selling, and his apartment on the edge of downtown. We live in Albany, the capital of New York State. Second source, an attorney. Armed with information about my wife's activities, I contacted family law expert Leanne Miller, a friend of mine. Yes, I know, you get what you pay for, who told me that I would be at a financial disadvantage in a divorce. You see, I have two children, Thomas age 7 and Rebecca age 5, and the New York. State courts are particularly inclined to give custody to mothers, and it doesn't matter that the mothers are cheating whores. No, it doesn't matter at all. Judges in New York are more willing to award custody to the mother than to the father. For the father to get custody, the mother has to be a serial killer or worse. The courts are heavily tipped in favor of the mother. The father is almost always bypassed. The father's abilities as a parent are virtually ignored in any court proceeding. Judges are more likely to give custody to the mother, a drug-addicted prostitute, than to the father, a corporate lawyer. That's me, a corporate lawyer. My wife is not a prostitute, but you know what I mean. She's a real estate agent, dealing mostly in commercial and high-end residential real estate. Don't get me wrong. I believe that for the most part, mothers are wonderful people to raise children. But I also believe that fathers who love their children are also great at raising them. In my case, that includes my children too. So why shouldn't I be considered equally qualified to raise them? Not according to the New York State courts, no. To them, I'm automatically a deadbeat asshole. Bastards! And my lawyer managed to give me some particularly important advice. Do nothing. That's right, you heard me, do nothing. Because if I do anything to right the wrong of my wife's infidelity, I'll be the one who ends up getting screwed. I'll be screwed by the judge, screwed by New York State family law, and screwed by a court bent on infidelity. You see, popular opinion and historical precedent says that in a divorce, my wife will out me. She can cheat on her lover and be rewarded for it. So my highly trained and very experienced attorney, that friend, gave me some wise advice. Do nothing. Or better yet, do the same thing my wife does. But don't get caught. Because even if my wife's cheating is discovered, if she has proof of my infidelity, the court will have an extra reason to screw me. Oh my God. Where does that leave me? In the ass, that's where. So I walked out of the lawyer's office, went back to my own office, closed the door, and sulked for the rest of the day. How could this have happened? What had I done wrong? Why did she do this to me? The feeling of failure plunged me into a deep depression as the realization of the state of my marriage hit me like a tsunami wave. It rolled over me and made me feel like I was drowning. I know that sounds silly, but that's exactly how I felt. I ran the one statement my lawyer kept repeating over and over in my head: do nothing. But how could I do it? And for how long? And when would I realize it was time to call it a day? What would happen then? The uncertainty of it all made me physically sick. Everything inside me was churning with the realization that my marriage was a farce. My wife was taking advantage of me and willingly betraying me and our children. Her entertainment meant more to her than her marriage and her children. Am I making more of this than I need to? Maybe I just need to calm down and develop a plan. I knew I had to develop some sort of plan, but at that moment I had no idea what that plan would be. I would have to work on it. Around 6 p.m., I headed home and pretended that I was still a happy husband and father. In fact, on the way home, I was determined that I would not do anything that would give away the fact that I knew my wife was a traitorous slut bitch. No, sir. I will pretend to be happy, happy, happy as hell. And then I'll do the same thing my wife did. A week later, I went to see a psychologist, and he just looked at me and asked me about my relationship with my parents and if I hated my father. I quickly dismissed his psychobabble and decided I would do it this way: lay out my problems on e-paper. And so, a few months later, after some mental anguish and coming to the realization that I had to do something to feel better, to bring justice to this shitty situation, I found myself in a friend with benefits position with a woman I used to work with. She is an attorney at the same firm where I work. Divorced, has 2 young children in elementary school. Amanda Stewart is a year older than me. She's tall, slender, very fit and beautiful, and I still can't figure out why she's so interested in me. After all, she can get almost any man just by wagging her index finger at him. Don't get me wrong, I'm not exactly a fat, ugly asshole. Quite the opposite. I'm 6 feet tall. My weight is 165 pounds, and I'm in good physical shape. I run, bike, and work out regularly. I have a full mop of brown hair, all my teeth, I wear glasses just for reading. I'm not terribly ugly, and my wife was the only one who wanted to start dating me. As I found out in a casual conversation with Amanda, she had given up on the idea of being happy at the same time as being married. After much soul-searching, she had come to the conclusion that her husband was not the right person to marry, and after working to keep her relationship with him intact, they both decided they didn't want to be married to each other. It wasn't until later, when we became friends, that I found out that the father of her children was not her ex-husband. That was the main reason for their divorce. I can understand how that could be the reason for the breakup of a relationship. It would be the same for me if I found out I was not the biological father of my children. But that's not my problem. After all, I had a DNA test done. So I'm taking advantage of Amanda's needs. It just so happens that her needs and mine are the same right now. She's smart and sophisticated, the kind of woman a man can fall in love with simply and easily. I don't feel pressured with her, not like with Laura. We don't invest much in each other, not emotionally. Maybe the relationship Laura has with the guy she's having fun with is the same. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I figured that if Laura ever decided to give up her affair with her lover, I would do the same. But there was no indication that this was in her future. Periodic checks by my investigator confirmed that my dear wife was getting at least once a week from her lover, so I decided I needed to get STD tests to make sure she wasn't bringing home any unwanted germs. The tests, thankfully, have always been negative. Now I have a few things to explain. My wife's name is Laura Grosvenor Kennedy. At work, she's called Grosvenor. She thinks it's a little more highbrow than Kennedy, but you have to agree that Kennedy's surname is almost royalty in the United States. The Grosvenor surname, on the other hand, goes back centuries to England, and she considers it more noble. It might attract more elite clients who would want to do business with the firm she works for. We are both 34 years old, and as I mentioned, we live in Albany, in a very nice neighborhood called Pine Hills. Our house is near the university and close to downtown and the metropolitan buildings. It doesn't take me long to get to work, just a few minutes. Laura's office is near mine downtown, but since she has to leave the office often, she drives her car to work. I drive a 3-year-old Subaru Outback, and Laura has a new leased Mercedes. On the surface, we lead perfectly normal lives. We are busy with the kids, careers, and all that daily life requires of us. The house is about 80 years old, but has been thoroughly updated and renovated over the years. It is a 3-story home built in the Queen Anne Victorian style. There is so much space in the house that we could spend all day in it and not see each other until just before dinner. We have 5 bedrooms and 6 bathrooms and 2 little closet space. There are storage closets in the basement and on the 3rd floor, so that's where we keep spare clothes, Christmas decorations and boxes for Halloween decorations, costumes, and sports equipment. I have a detached 2-car garage at the back of the property that also stores gardening tools. Laura is constantly painting or remodeling something. The small bedroom next to the master bedroom had some walls knocked down and became a walk-in closet for the master bedroom. It had that upper-middle-class homey feel to it, and we thought we were doing well. Or at least I thought we were. I was clearly wrong. Laura was missing something. Some time ago, I started piecing together little things that one day added up to a suspicion that Laura was having an affair on the side. She was very good at hiding it. When she came home, it was almost impossible to see any outward signs that she had spent 2 hours after dinner having fun with her boyfriend. We made dinner for our family and talked about the day we had spent. We made plans and discussed the schedule for the next few days. It was all painfully routine and boring. Maybe that's just the way it was. Normal and boring. No excitement. Everything was fine until I discovered her second cell phone. I was looking in her purse for her car keys to move her car since it was blocking the garage door, and I needed to move it aside to get some shit out. And there it was. It was turned off. Then I turned it on. It was secured with a 6-digit code to open it. I typed in a few digits, but nothing came out, and after the 4th try, there was a warning that if I entered a 5th wrong code, it would block me from trying again. I decided I didn't want her to know I was fiddling with it, so I turned it off and put it back in my bag. For a while, I racked my brain trying to figure out why she would want a second cell phone. Every conclusion I drew suggested that she was hiding something. What exactly, and why was the $64 million question? It plagued me for days. I analyzed every aspect of our lives, our marriage, and our work, trying to find the answer. In the end, I decided not to bring it up, but to get more information. That's when I brought in an investigator. What they told me was my biggest fear. Laura clearly wanted more. She wanted a thrill in her life, and I wasn't the guy she wanted that from. I mean, if you're bored, the normal thing to do is suggest a change of routine. Start a new hobby, go on a trip, volunteer for some good cause, and maybe get active in the community. But no, Laura decided to start having fun with another guy. How am I supposed to deal with this? I racked my brain for a solution. The lawyer in me understood that I needed to approach the case as logically and unemotionally as possible. But that didn't take into account my children. With the unemotional approach, I had to confront Laura and demand that she end it under threat of divorce. But what if she decides she doesn't want to stop? What then? What if Laura decides she wants a divorce and fights for control of the children in a protracted battle? Who wins and who loses? Well, the lawyer in me can tell you that we will all lose, everyone except our legal representatives. They win for $300 an hour while we fight. Over who gets what furniture and how many minutes each of us gets to spend with the kids, on what days and where. No, the kids lose first, and so do Laura and me. No, if we break up, it will be done on mutual terms and in a way that doesn't burn everything down. Thus, I went back to what my own lawyer had advised. Do nothing. I pondered this for several weeks, all the while trying to figure out why my wife chose to have fun with other men. What were my shortcomings? Was I paying enough attention to Laura? Had the romance disappeared from our marriage? Was I just too stale and boring for her? The self-doubt was killing me. But as I tried to make sense of it all, I decided I needed to step up my game a little. I had to do something. What exactly? It wasn't immediately clear at that moment, but I got started. I usually try to exercise 2 or 3 times a week, but with the increased stress, I realized I needed to increase my workouts. So I'm running a lot more than I used to. I get up at 5 a.m., put on my sneakers, and head out to the treadmills in my neighborhood. In the last 2 months, I've lost about 8 pounds and about 2 inches off my waist. I also go to the gym that is in my neighborhood, which is right next door to my office. 2 days a week, I go there and work out at the gym. I've had a few sessions with an instructor to push me and make sure I don't injure myself early on by trying to pump too much iron. I started with lighter weights and gradually progressed to harder weights. It was a slow process, but I started to notice an increase in upper body strength. Since I had become unattractive to my wife, I wanted to try to increase my attractiveness. By improving my fitness, I wanted to let her know that I wanted to be noticed. It was something like, "Look at me. I'm trim and desirable. I have 6-pound abs," or something like that. I tried taking her out for romantic dinners alone, but her damn cell phone kept buzzing and ruining the mood. I tried sensual massages in bed with warm oil, candles, quiet music, and wine. Once again, that damn phone ruined everything. I tried turning it off, but when she caught me, she complained that she might miss an important call or an email from a client. Everything I did ended badly. Anyway, we all got used to the new routine. And I have to admit that even it became routine and boring, at least for me. What was the point? Laura and I kept secrets from each other. She got them from Jason on a regular basis, and I'd started a revenge relationship with a woman who until a couple years ago had been a serial cheater. So all my notions of taking the moral high ground were now proven to be a myth. I was just as bad as she was. But somehow it felt like the right thing to do. 6 months later. So, for the past few months, things continued pretty much the same as before. I asked the detective agency to keep checking in periodically, every 2 or 3 months, to see what Laura was up to. She was still having fun with her lover once or twice a week. Knowing this, I decided that I would not be in a hurry to end Amanda and I's extracurricular activities. In fact, over the past few months, Amanda and I have gotten a little closer, closer to the point where she got to know my kids and I got to know hers. I'll come back to that in a minute. At home, over dinner with the kids on Thursday night, Laura told me she was going to a conference in Las Vegas for a week. It was advertised as a national realtor event to get together and share information, analyze what was working in the industry, and let everyone know about changes in laws that were affecting the industry, and perhaps better ways to sell homes in blighted buildings that no one wanted. In reality, they would set up at a fancy resort with a monster pool, have a blast, get together late in the morning when they were severely hungover, drink a few cups of coffee, pretend to pay attention to a pointless and boring PowerPoint presentation, and then plan a party for that day. Her realtor conventions were always thinly disguised party weeks. I knew this one would be no different, so I decided now was the time to change things up a bit. Time to show Laura what she was risking. Who am I trying to fool? Laura was a smart woman and knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't just wake up one day with a stupid disease. She's a big girl and knew the risks and rewards that caused her to venture into our marriage. This convention coincided with spring school vacation. We had talked about taking the kids to Disneyland in Florida, but somehow completely forgot about it when this convention showed up on her calendar. My frustration with her growing selfishness and lack of concern for her family came out. I thought you agreed that we were going to go to Disney World with the kids this year. The look on my face said completely that I was mad at her for going to Las Vegas when we had already made plans to take the kids on spring break. This is very important to me, Jim. Besides, Becca's too young to ride some of the rides her brother can ride, and you know that if she can't do everything he does, it's only going to mean a fight. Wait, we can handle Becca if we explain it to her. She's a very smart kid and understands all about safety. I really don't understand why you're putting another real estate deal ahead of your family. She let out a huge disappointed sigh and rolled her eyes. The company wants me to go, and they've already booked the flight and hotel, so I don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm going to the conference period. The rest of the night passed very quietly in the house. After putting the kids to bed, I took a long hot shower and went to bed with a million thoughts in my head. I didn't sleep very well that night, but an idea occurred to me. Some kind of fundamental justice, it seemed to me. So a couple of days later, I talked to Amanda and pitched her the idea of the two of us going to Disneyland in Florida for a short vacation, my kids and hers. I hadn't said a word to Laura about it. After talking a bit about logistics, Amanda and I decided that's what we would do. So we booked the plane tickets and the resort, and in a couple phone calls, we had everything set up. Laura was barely out the airport doors before I had already started packing up the kids and getting them ready for the trip. To say they were excited is a massive understatement. I told them that we would keep it a secret from Mom for now, and they smiled their beautiful baby smile and nodded in agreement. So, the day after Laura went off to party poolside in Vegas with all the horny real estate agents, Amanda and I, with 4 kids in our arms, boarded a plane to Orlando. One of the airlines has a non-stop flight that takes just under 3 hours. Without much effort, by mid-afternoon, we were in the warm sunshine and the kids were happily playing in the pool. This was new to Amanda and me. Our kids had met before. It was a Saturday in downtown Albany, and we met by chance. We ended up having lunch together, and the kids got along great. Lunch was at a fast food place that had a playground for the kids to burn off sugar. Amanda and I had a very different conversation from our normal interactions. She told me a lot more details about her marriage and the path to its demise. She also talked about her commitment to her children. After her divorce, she realized that she had made some very serious mistakes, but she wanted to be a good mother. She loves her children very much, wants the best for them, and tries to provide that. I talked about the betrayal I felt when I found out about Laura's infidelity and her cheating on Jason. I could see that she was listening to me intently, not even taking her eyes off her children. I tried to watch her face to see what she was thinking. She was totally in lawyer mode. She had to tell me some of what she was thinking. You know, Jim, your life is very much like an open marriage right now. You just haven't told each other about it. Are you sure you want to live like that? I looked at her. I haven't told her about it yet because, honestly, I don't want it to mess up those 2 kids' lives. I don't want to turn into a father who only spends a few weeks a year with his kids. Everything I've read says that in divorce, the children are the ones who lose the most. I can't take that risk. At least not yet. I exhaled deeply, since I hadn't been breathing at the last minute as I spoke. I knew that eventually Amanda would want to move away from our FWB relationship. That's just the way she is. Mentally, I knew she wasn't a big fan of monogamy. I figured that the longer we continued our relationship, the more likely it was to end. She would want to move on to a new FWB. But she didn't. So there we were in the happiest place on earth with 4 kids and pretending to be one big family. I had booked 2 adjoining rooms at the resort. One room had 2 double beds, and the other had 2 sets of bunk beds for the kids. I had to splurge a bit to get the resort to provide the rooms and beds I wanted, but it worked out. It's amazing what a small amount of money can do. We spent the morning and afternoon walking around the huge park and visiting as many rides as we could, and then when the kids were tired and hyped up, we went back to the hotel to cool off in the pool. By the time dinner was ready, the kids were ready for bed. This meant that Amanda and I could enjoy time alone, and we usually had a drink and a meal and then each other. The 5 days at Disney World were great. The kids saw everything, including a day at SeaWorld, did everything they wanted to do, and were sad to leave when we got home and back to school. I had to go back to work. Amanda needed to go back to work. Laura was also coming home to get back to her regular routine. Laura showed up later that afternoon when the kids and I got home. She was sunburned and with a brutal headache. All the partying had caught up with her. The kids were excitedly telling her they had gone to Disneyland and SeaWorld, and when she looked at me, she voiced her disapproval, saying she wished we had gone there as a family. What the hell, Jim? I thought we were supposed to go to Disneyland as a family. Why the hell did you take them there without me? Well, you probably remember we talked about it, and you made the decision to let the family go for another week of partying in Vegas. If we're not important enough to you, well, too bad. We went without you. We had fun. I hope Vegas was worth it. I left the room before she could say anything else. Damn shame, I thought. She had 6 days of fun with her boyfriend in Vegas, and I had 5 days of fun with Amanda. I reminded her that last year we had promised the kids that they could go on school vacations. Her going to a conference in Vegas at the same time was not something I wanted to disappoint the kids with. Too bad she missed it. She chose Vegas over her family. Her loss. Monday, I went back to work and got busy. It was 2 weeks before I was able to see Amanda. She had to go away to see clients, and I figured this was probably her way of finding a way out of our arrangement. Maybe 4 days at Disneyland with me and 4 kids was too much for her. But it wasn't. Amanda texted me several times to let me know that her kids loved it at Disneyland, and so did she. The next time we met, there was a subtle change in our communication. Little things. I noticed that she acted more relaxed when we met. Nothing had changed with Laura. The investigator's latest report confirmed what I already knew. Laura was still seeing her lover on a regular basis. So I decided I would stick to my schedule. Don't get me wrong, we had a pretty rigid Saturday night schedule. But Laura seemed to take every opportunity to invite someone over to our house or offer to do something, and then later that night say it was too late and that she was too tired. We ended up doing it once a month, if at all. I tried my best to pretend to be an understanding husband, but eventually my give and take factor became very weak. Laura was the one who started the journey, and I was good at anticipating the potholes. Next chapter. 8 months later. So, there have been a few changes in my life. Wow, that's a lot of changes. So many changes that I don't know where to start. So, the first big change. About 7 months ago, Laura announced to me that she was pregnant. She broke the news to me about a month after the convention in Vegas. I am almost 99% sure that I am not the father of the child. She and I had had so little contact in the months before that the likelihood of it being my baby was slim to none. Nevertheless, I planned to wait until the baby was born and take a DNA test. A local lab in Albany would have the results in 24 hours. Laura is now heavily pregnant and, although still working, has greatly reduced her work hours. She still sees her boyfriend every week, and that has not changed. If the DNA tests confirm my suspicions, I hope there is room in his one-bedroom apartment for Laura and their baby. After Laura announced her pregnancy to me, I met with the lawyer again and reviewed my options. A DNA test to prove parentage was important, or I would likely be paying child support for years. Under New York state law, any child born in a marriage between a man and a woman is automatically considered a product of that marriage. Therefore, this means that the law considers me the father unless I can prove otherwise. So a DNA test, once the baby is born, will be on my personal priority list. My attorney suggested other tools to use after the baby is born when the DNA test proves parentage. More on that later. Next chapter. Laura. I'm in deep shit. I'm pretty sure I got pregnant in Vegas at a convention. There was a guy there that I've seen at other conventions, and I've wanted to sleep with him before, but I've never had the courage to do it. This year, I let alcohol and my own sanity take over and had fun with him. For 3 days. It was a mistake. It compounded my previous mistake when I was busy and forgot to refill my prescription for birth control pills last month. I thought it would take me more than 3 months to get pregnant even without the pill. At least that's what the literature that came with my prescription says. But in the fine print, it also says that women on the pill can get pregnant sooner in rare cases. Apparently, I was that rare case. When the baby is born, it will be clear to Jim and everyone else that he's not the father. Shit. What am I supposed to do now? My husband will disown me. He'll probably kick me to the curb. I suppose I deserve that, but still, we are a family and I deserve some consideration. I will fight for my kids and threaten him if I have to. I want us to be a family. If I can convince Jim to forgive me and be a father to this child as well as our other children, then maybe we can get through this. Maybe. Confess now or wait. Next chapter. Amanda. I learned a big lesson from my short marriage to Michael. His new wife, Rebecca, was the benefactor of my stupidity. She waited and watched me self-destruct and then moved in with him and took Michael for herself. She was patient and careful, and in the end, she won. And I decided to follow her example. But then I wised up. I decided to bide my time and, when the time was right, make my move. I wanted a husband, a man who would be mine, and I was ready to be faithful to him. Jim was everything I wanted to see in a husband. In many ways, he is very similar to my ex-husband Michael. His sense of loyalty to those who are loyal to him is very strong, and his sense of duty to his children is carried by him. Perhaps it is his Scottish and Irish heritage. Nevertheless, I decided to wait and see if his wife would. Burn the marriage down, and if she did, I would be ready to make my move. Well, the time has come. You can criticize me for my past, fair enough, but I have learned my lesson, and I do need a new life with a man I can be a wife to. I don't want to say I'm a perfect person now, I'm definitely not. But I have become a different person. Last year, when I got to know Jim better and saw what he was really like, I decided he could be the one. A trip to Disneyland with all the kids pushed me to make a plan. I didn't really have to do anything. All I had to do was bide my time, let Jim know how I felt about him, and prepare for the next step. My kids were already asking me if Jim's kids would be their new brother and sister, and if Jim would be their daddy. It couldn't be clearer. Next chapter. Jim. Laura called me at the office to tell me that her water broke. I rushed home, grabbed my hospital bag, made a couple calls to have the kids picked up after school, and we headed to the hospital. Baby number 3's labor is usually much less than baby number 1 or 2. The doctor told us that he thought this baby was going to be large, so we shouldn't expect labor to be fast. Doc was wrong. The labor went faster than they expected. It was only a few hours from the time we arrived at the hospital, and the baby girl was born. Yes, a girl. And what was our surprise? The doctor who delivered the baby was wide-eyed as she handed the baby to the nurses to clean her up, weighed and measured her, made sure all airways were clear, recorded all vital signs, and wrapped the baby in a warm blanket. The doctor tried to watch my face closely as the nurse handed the baby to Laura. My suspicions that I was the baby's father were immediately realized. Laura took her daughter in her arms, and the look on her face as she got a good look at the baby, I will never forget. She looked at the baby and immediately shifted her gaze to me. I think the look on my face speaks for itself. My expression was blank. My mouth was tightly clamped shut, and now I was about to learn the truth. I heard Laura sigh, realizing that her promiscuity had been exposed. I turned and left the room. I heard Laura call my name, but I ignored her. I walked over to the nurse's station and asked for forms to fill out the birth certificate information. I filled out the form carefully, making sure I put in Laura's name and date of birth as well as all the other information. When I got to the father's information, I wrote an unknown and left it at that. The nurse took the forms from me and looked over them cursorily, and when she got to the father section, she looked at me. I just nodded and turned to leave the hospital. I never went back there again. 2 days later, Laura and the baby arrived home, courtesy of her friend Kelly. She was curious as hell to know what the story was. She kept quiet as she helped Laura get the baby and bags into the house. When she saw me, she didn't say a word, just nodded at me as if to say, "It's your problem now, good luck." I left Laura alone for most of the day, and about the time the kids were due home from school, she found me in the home office and asked, "So, what do you want to tell the kids when they ask about the baby?" I exhaled. You'll tell them whatever you want to tell them. Laura didn't know it, but I walked into the real estate office where she worked and talked to a coworker I knew she had gone to a convention in Vegas with. After a frank conversation between us, in which I practically accused her of having fun with her husband in Vegas, she reluctantly gave me the name of the man Laura spent most of her time with. Armed with that knowledge and warning her not to tell Laura what she had told me, or I would be easily predisposed to share any information with her husband about what they were doing in Vegas. And I know that's not very high on the scale of ethical concerns, but it was all I had at the time, and it seemed to work. Back to the first problem. What to tell the kids when they ask why their new sister has such dark skin? I began to think through a plan of action for me and my kids. Part of me wanted to publicly out Laura as a cheating slut, but I knew I didn't need to do that. She would do it on her own. Once her family and mine saw the baby, it would become abundantly clear that I was not the father. And then what? I called Mr. Glenn Duncan, a real estate agent in Houston. Duncan was well known in Houston. He was an NFL player. He spent most of his time in the NFL on the team's practice squad or on the bench. He actually spent very little time on the field, but to those around him, he could have been a Super Bowl winner if you heard him talk. For rookie football players, knees are the most important tool, and once you deny them, your career is over. Such was the case with Mr. Duncan. Duncan was a large man, over 6 feet tall and about 220 pounds. He was in good physical shape and looked great for the most part when dressed in an expensive suit. His picture on the agency's website showed him at his best, with a wide smile. He excelled in the real estate business and used his NFL background to impress clients and close deals. Now, he had a new deal to close that he didn't like. I called Mr. Duncan, and I can tell you that overall our conversation did not go well. When I asked him if he knew Laura Grosvenor, he played dumb and said he didn't know anyone by that name. He also couldn't remember if he had been to the convention in Vegas last year, and that he was very busy and had to leave. In parting, I told him that Laura would be contacting him about his newly born daughter and that I would be asking the court for a DNA test. There was dead silence on the phone. I also asked Mr. Duncan to confirm his home address and phone number so that the court order could be delivered. At this point, the phone line suddenly cut off. Gee. Mr. Duncan has Mrs. Duncan and 3 little Duncans at home. There's no telling how many more he has around the country. So, to summarize, I have a longtime cheating wife who got knocked up by her boyfriend at a convention and had a baby. My kids are somewhat puzzled that their new sister has much darker skin than they do, but in their childlike innocence, they don't give it a second thought. I'll have to explain it to them in a few weeks. In the meantime, I have to work with Laura. Our future together may be in doubt. Next chapter. Laura. Well, I'm certainly in over my head. I need to talk to Jim and see if we can work this out. He's usually a very reasonable man, and there's no reason why he can't be a father to this child as well. In time, he will be able to accept her as his own. I can call Glenn and let him know it's a girl. I talked to him after I found out I was pregnant, but he wanted nothing to do with me at all. He practically hung up on me and even suggested that if I tried to contact him, he might take some legal action to stop me. That's a beautiful what if. This man professed his love to me in Vegas. Jim has been avoiding me as much as possible since the baby was born. He is perfectly fine with our children, but refuses to touch the baby. When the baby cries, he just looks at me to do something. In fact, after he puts our older 2 to bed, he spends most of his time in his office. Jim has moved out of our bedroom. He moved his stuff into the closet in the spare bedroom on the 3rd floor and all his toiletries into the bathroom. He set up a crib in the master bedroom where I still sleep. I know that in a few weeks he will calm down and want to talk about it. I'm going back to the gym and getting rid of the remaining pregnancy weight. Jim is spending more time out of the house with the kids. He says they take a lot of walks in the park. The kids come home and want to tell me about what they've seen and done. I am here most of the day and night taking care of the baby. I need a shower. Next chapter. Amanda. In my marriage to Michael, I learned an important lesson. Just when you think you've won, you lose. Michael's new wife, Rebecca, was patient and waited for me to screw up. And when I did screw up and failed to fully realize it and take action, she took action. That's why she is married to a wonderful man and has 2 children with him. They live somewhere in Scotland, in the Highlands, I think by the ocean. They love country life and live on a fairly large property with an old house that they are slowly renovating. So, without remorse, I waited for Laura to screw up, and she did, and screwed up big time. It was time for me to start my game for the man I wanted. I had learned to keep my feet together with other men, except for the one man I wanted, Jim. I knew he was first and foremost a good man, a good father, and wanted to be a good husband. It was a shame that the woman he married had cheated on him over the years. It was easy for me to spot the signs of her infidelity because I have made the same mistakes many times. The fathers of my children were my 2 lovers, not my husband. Therefore, Michael was now the husband of another woman. I would not make the same mistake again. I tried to be not only emotionally close to Jim, but physically close to him when we were dating. At work, I would stop by his office when I had time and talk to him, and we began to meet more often at lunch. There were rumors going around the firm. The attorneys and staff knew that Laura was having an affair and had a daughter who was not Jim's. Everyone was quietly discussing when the divorce would take place. Every time Jim left the office for personal business, those who worked with him looked at him, wanting to find out what was going on. Could this day have come? Could the end of his marriage be near? His personal attorney's office was only a few blocks away, so it was the norm for him to walk back and forth. It gave him time to think and de-stress. He made a habit of texting me when he was going to a meeting. I was always waiting to see what would happen next. I knew Laura's end was getting closer. Next chapter. Jim. So here's the deal. I've been puzzling over the great question for days now. What the hell do I do with a wife who had a child with another man? A wife who's been unfaithful to me for years, and now she's also wiping my nose, and very publicly at that. My brain was screaming at me to get some boxes, fill them with all her shit, and throw them with her and her baby to the curb. While that would have been the most acceptable solution, I realized it wasn't realistic, considering the kids would be asking questions, and I didn't want to be the one who had to give the answers yet. Besides, I'm not exactly a heartless bastard. Well, I want to be. But I had to do something. I had a pretty good idea of what, but I also knew it would be painful for my whole family. Laura's father quietly told me to do what I thought was right, whatever I decided. He couldn't believe his daughter was that stupid. Next chapter. Laura. My mother and father lived near Albany and were anxious to come see their new grandson. When they walked into the bedroom and saw the baby in the crib, my mother and father were surprised. That would be an understatement. My mom covered her mouth with her hand, pulled back, and was forced to sit down in the chair next to the crib. My father just looked at me, shook his head in disgust, and left the room. Dad went downstairs, walked over to the liquor cabinet, poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, and sat down at the dining room table to drink it. He didn't move when Mom and I came downstairs a few minutes later. I held the baby girl in my arms, preparing to breastfeed her. Mom looked at Dad, and he poured her a drink and held it out to her across the table. She took a big sip, and then they both looked at me. I decided it was best to tell the truth, but maybe not the whole truth. It might be too hard for them to hear tonight. So, I admitted that I had sex last year in Vegas. My dad said, almost mumbling, "Not. Everything that happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." While that was true, it wasn't necessary. My mom went straight to the obvious question. "What are you and Jim going to do now?" I exhaled before answering. "I don't know." My mom looked at the table and asked, "Are you leaving him?" I threw my head up. "No." She continued, "Is he kicking you out?" Since the baby was born, we haven't said more than a few words to each other. He spends as much time with the kids outside the house as he can. He moved into the spare bedroom, the same one I was going to use for the baby. That's why the crib is in the master bedroom. Mom shook her head. Dad just stared at the table. Both of them weren't even breathing. Mom summed up her thoughts. God, how could you be so stupid? I thought we raised you better than that. Her comment was an affirmation, not a question. I sat there without saying a word. My mother had put the question squarely on the table. Would Jim make me leave? I hoped he would listen to reason and be a father to this little girl. But I knew that every time he looked at her, he would be reminded of my infidelity. That I had cheated on him was pretty obvious. We didn't talk about it at all. He avoided me at every opportunity. And I couldn't blame him. What man would want to be reminded that his wife was pregnant by another man? And then there was the product of that affair. Not that I had a long-term affair with Glenn. He was well known in the business. He was a very pleasant guy to talk to, always able to compliment women. This time I drank too much and ended up in his hotel room the first night of the conference. We spent the next few days together, and it was wonderful. All the usual household chores. Work, kids, husband were forgotten, and I just enjoyed the attention he gave me. At the end of the conference, I returned home, barely able to keep up. I knew I had to clean up before the flight, and then get ready to meet Jim and the kids. When I got home, the kids quickly told me that they had just gotten back from Disneyland in Florida. I told Jim that Disneyland was something I wanted to do with my family. He looked at me and said, "You should be there," and walked away. I didn't know what the hell to do. I had a massive hangover, and I couldn't take a shower to wash away the realization that I might have screwed up big time in Vegas. With Glenn, I'd overreacted. The alcohol had done its job. The rest of my brain, the one that knows I have kids and a husband, was marinated in martinis. I realized that I had spent at least 4 days having fun with Glenn. He's a very smug guy. When I got home, I realized that I needed to have fun with Jim as soon as possible. I thought it would help bridge the gap between us, a gap that had been growing for some time. Maybe he knew about Jason too. And then I know that Jim and I hadn't been very close to each other lately, and it was affecting our family life. At the time, I thought that spending more time with Jim and the kids was something that should be a priority. A few weeks later, my period disappeared, and I started experiencing morning sickness. I realized I was pregnant and decided something had to be done. I should have had an abortion. But I didn't. I quietly prayed, "Please, God, let this baby be Jim." But it wasn't. Next chapter, Jim. To answer the obvious question of, what the hell am I supposed to do, I decided that seeing a lawyer would help me better understand the problems I was facing. You see, my brain was completely convinced that divorcing Laura was my only option. That is, it would be very difficult for me to be the father of her child when it was clear to everyone who saw us that she was pregnant by another man. A biracial child from 2 very white parents is somewhat obvious. At first, I thought the father might be Jason, a guy she regularly partied with. Obviously, it wasn't him. She had been unfaithful to him as well. I had to laugh about it. I know what you're thinking. This is the 21st century, and my attitude is extremely racist. It has nothing to do with race. It has to do with the fact that my wife got pregnant by another man. The child is innocent in all of this. The child has no choice of parents. His mother and father are who they are. The fact that the mother is white and the father is black is not the issue. The issue is that my wife had a child with another man. I think it's very simple. My attorney asked if I did a DNA test. I did it and passed on the results. I also handed over the information my investigator had gathered about the baby's father and pictures. We then had a heart-to-heart talk about New York State family law and what it meant to me, especially now that Laura so obviously had a relationship with another man while we were married. I told Leanne that my first priority was my 2 children. I wanted full custody of them and was willing to go nuclear to accomplish this. I was prepared to declare that Laura was an unfit mother, use all the evidence my investigator had gathered, and therefore custody should be mine. I was wealthy enough that I could afford to fight if necessary and hire a part-time nanny to watch the child after school. There were several precedents in court that allowed for this. I would retain ownership of the house and would be happy to pay Laura half of its value. The children and I would stay in the house as it provided them with a high degree of stability and allowed them to go to the same school. The youngest was already in school, which meant that the main issue was after-school babysitting. I was fine with that. And I didn't even touch the issue of child support from Laura. All I wanted was for her to pack up her things, the baby, and move out. To get things started, Leanne suggested that we draw up a formal separation agreement. For those who don't know what this agreement is, that's the lawyer in me talking. I will say that a separation agreement is a legally binding document that is essentially a precursor to a divorce. You could say that it gives couples some respite to live separately and decide if they want to save the marriage. The truth is that most CAs become a template for divorce, as few couples actually get back into a marriage. I think it's really a step-by-step divorce. I wasn't sure that SA was what I wanted. I thought the SA stage was just putting off the inevitable. Why put things off until later? Leanne decided that CA was a way to find out if the child's father was willing to recognize the child as his own and provide financial support. Also, California was a way to evict Laura from the house and give me and the kids a chance to see how we would live on our own. I would love to allow Laura free visits with them. I imagine it would be more difficult for her to take care of the baby and kids every other weekend on her own. For the past couple years, Laura has left the bulk of the child-rearing responsibilities pretty much to me. Her work and extracurricular activities with Jason would result in her coming home to the three of us, tired, hungry, and wanting to finish her work. Often, she would leave in the evenings to meet with potential clients or show someone a house. Some weeks, the amount of time we spent together as a family was practically zero. As time went on, I got busy with the children. They became less dependent on their mother, and we all began to move on with our lives. After the baby was born, Laura and I hardly spoke to each other. I made no effort to attend to the baby's needs. It was all on Laura. So on Friday night, about a month after the baby was born, I started. I pulled out a large envelope and said to her in my very controlled voice, "Laura, we need to talk." The look on her face said it all. She turned slightly pale and realized that this was serious and would not end well for her. I realized that she was hoping that the longer we put off talking about the baby and her infidelity, the more likely I would ignore the fact that she had a child with another man. I poured her a glass of wine and slid it across the dining room table to her. I had a glass of ice water for discussion. I placed the envelope on the table, and she stared at it while she drank the wine. She nodded at the envelope and slowly asked, "What do you have there, Jim?" I got right to the point. It's the separation agreement my attorney prepared. I think it's time for us to think about the future. I think you and I need some space to figure out what we want, and obviously our marriage isn't in the best shape. Obviously, I'm not the man you want as a husband, and you're not the woman I want to be my wife right now. So I think it's for our mutual good that we need to separate and reevaluate our marriage. Laura's eyes widened and her hands began to shake. She took a large sip of wine. I continued. My attorney has prepared this agreement, and it states that I stay here with the children, and you and the baby move out. You can take a month to find a new place to live. You can take as much furniture out of the house as you see fit. You can spend as much time with the kids as you want, but they will live with me. I have arranged for a part-time nanny to help with after-school care and to fill in for the kids at times when I need to be away. I've made arrangements with work to adjust my schedule so I can work from home more. Laura had a look on her face like a deer in headlights. Obviously, I had surprised her with this essay, and she needed time to think about her options. Jim, why do you want me and the baby to move? The look on my face said it all. It was time to be blunt. Come on, Laura, be honest. You decided to have fun and then get pregnant, and you want me to act like everything is fine. Uh-uh. That's not going to happen. You should know by now that I won't tolerate that kind of disrespect from you. You've been cheating on me for years, and now it's over. So you have 30 days to pack your bags, find a place to live, get the baby, and leave. I gathered my strength and really wanted to vent my frustration on her. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. It wouldn't do any good, and I had to think of my children first. Staying calm and in control of myself at that moment was very difficult. I handed her an envelope across the table. Here is the separation agreement. I've tried to be very fair to you. If you want, get yourself an attorney and familiarize yourself with it. In fact, I strongly encourage you to do so. But know this, I have no intention of recognizing your child as mine. I got up from the table and left the room. There was silence in the house. So for the next month, everything in my house was as normal as I could make it, given that my wife and her child were about to move out. She went apartment hunting and found a 2-bedroom place not far from her office. Maternity leave would give her time to move in and get settled before she had to go back to work. The SA document had dates stamped on it, and I reminded her from time to time that her time to leave the house was approaching. We walked around the house and she let me know what she wanted to take to set up her apartment. I took all the pictures that were in the house and deleted them, especially the ones with her in them. I made some notes about changes I wanted to make to the house when she moved out. All this time, I kept my relationship with Amanda separate from Laura. In fact, I wasn't even sure if Laura knew I knew Amanda. I continued to see Amanda a couple times a week, and on weekends, we often did things together with our kids. Going to parks and visiting local recreational facilities was a welcome relief for me. The kids, who were now a year older, loved it. Amanda was curious about what Laura was going to do. She asked me what my plans were after finishing 6 months of SA. I was honest with her and told her that I highly doubted the possibility of reconciliation. Laura had been pretty much silent to me for some time now, unless it involved my children. My plan was to move forward with the divorce. At Leanne's recommendation, I entered into a separation agreement, primarily in the best interest of the children and both of our families. My mother in Arizona didn't care what I did, but I knew that Laura's family hoped that I could forgive Laura and be the father of her child. For me, it was all about respect. Without respect, there could be no marriage or relationship. Without respect, I couldn't call her my wife. I couldn't trust her with my interests and the interests of my children, and I knew her interests were not in my heart. No, the marriage was over. Amanda watched me carefully. She knew I was hurt and vulnerable, but I finally realized that I had to take things slow, take care of the children, and make sure they had a stable home in life. And that's exactly what I did. Next chapter. 6 months later. Laura, I've been living in this apartment for a while now. Jim let me bring enough furniture with me to make it comfortable. He gave me the bedroom furniture, lots of kitchen stuff, dishes, a kitchen table, and chairs. When the moving company packed up all my stuff, I looked around the house and realized I would miss it. I would come back here to pick up my kids, but I would never live here again. It was painful to realize that my stupidity had cost me my family, my home, and the life I thought I would always have. Why couldn't I just keep my cool around men who seemed attractive? Then, I decided that I could have fun with them, and as long as it was done away from Jim, there would be no problem. Everything was going great. Until I got pregnant. Now I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. I'm pretty much a single mom, and I have no time for a social life. I haven't had any in months. I have to go back to work next week, which means I have to look after the baby. My family has pretty much stopped calling me. People in my office saw me off with strange looks when I went there a few weeks ago. I haven't been able to shed the post-pregnancy pounds as quickly as I'd like, and money is tight. I had to give up my leased Mercedes, and now I have a Volkswagen. I noticed that Jim still drives his Subaru. Some things don't change. He is the stable rock that I have become accustomed to. I expect to get my divorce papers delivered soon. The separation agreement expires in a couple weeks, and as far as I can tell, Jim has no intention of forgiving me or reconciling. I tried to talk to him about it the last time I saw him when he was picking up the kids for the weekend, but he just looked at me, turned, and walked away. I understand what he means about respect. I'm just realizing it a little late. Next chapter. Amanda. Well, it's time to take action. The man I want is now divorced from his ex-wife and is easily adjusting to single parenthood. Jim is so organized that he manages to keep up with the kids, work, home, and even a social life. His social life consists mostly of me and my kids, and that suits me just fine. We spend a lot more time together and do things almost as a family. My kids and I started spending more time at Jim's house, even sometimes staying at his house on the weekends. I realized that I wasted my time with Michael, and I don't want to make the same mistake with Jim. Michael was a good man and would have been a great father to my children. It's too bad he didn't become their father. My sense of self-worth was so great that it overrode common sense, and I decided I could have my cake and eat it too. So I had ongoing relationships with several different men, and then the big thing happened. I got pregnant, and twice. When Michael found out and confronted me about it, I blanched and refused to talk to him. He walked away and said that if and when I was ready to tell him the truth, I should call him. I was so ashamed of myself for not calling, and he stopped waiting. Eventually, when I found the courage to talk to him, he had already left and found a woman who loved him, and only him. I was so stupid. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Now the man I wanted was free and could be mine, and I could be his. But then a new complication arose. Next chapter. Jim. So now I'm divorced. I'm a single father with 2 growing children. I'm a lawyer specializing in business and tax law. It's boring as shit, but it pays really well. I work from home part of the time so I can be with my kids to do all the important day-to-day stuff. I get home from work around 4:30 so I have time to make dinner, help with homework, and many other things they do. Laura is seeing the kids less and less often. She has gone back to work, and since she has to be the mother of a newborn, she has little time to see the other children. I remind her that the kids miss her and that she has to make time for them. But with her schedule as a real estate agent and weekend home opening events, that means she spends less and less time with them. There's not much I can do about that. So I plan a lot of outdoor activities. Amanda and her kids are often with us, and if you didn't know better, you would think we were one big happy family. And then everything changed. Next chapter. Amanda. All the signs and symptoms are there. This morning, my usual cup of coffee that I start the day with didn't want to down. Damn. My head was in the toilet when breakfast suddenly appeared. I washed my face and freshened up, then got the kids ready for school. On my way to the office, I stopped by the neighborhood pharmacy and bought a test kit. You know the one. Part of my brain was saying, damn, 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 as I knew what it meant. Nervous, I put the test in my briefcase and headed to work. All day, all I could think about was getting home and peeing on the thing. When I got home, I waited until the kids had gone to bed. Then I went into the bathroom and closed the door. I don't know why I closed the door, since my bathroom is adjacent to the master bedroom. But I closed it anyway. Inhaling and exhaling, I took it out of the package and got ready to pee. I put it under the jet and then set it aside for it to do its testing trick. I cleaned myself up and went downstairs to the kitchen. Why? I don't know. I was nervous. If the test showed what I thought it would be a very important step in my and Jim's relationship. It would be the make or break moment. I went back into the bathroom and with trembling hands picked up the small piece of white plastic. Oh my God. Next chapter. Laura. I thought about trying to talk to Jim and convince him to come back to my bed, but he won't talk to me. What am I supposed to do? Jason, the steady lover I broke up with a few months ago. I heard he's dating a graduate student and it's serious. She should watch her back. Between the baby and work, I have no free time for a social life. I don't like going to clubs with my work friends because it's impossible to know who you'll meet there. I mean, really, what can I do? So I decided that my husband would be a solid option. I mean, I still love this man. He's the father of my two children, and I know deep down he cares about me. I decided that I had nothing to lose by trying to talk to Jim. I needed to plan this carefully. I needed our meeting to take place in a neutral place, and I needed to make sure I didn't have a child with me. So I decided to take him out to dinner at a restaurant I knew he liked. There is a restaurant downtown called the Beer Barn. The name is a little misleading. It's a very classy yet casual place with a good menu of the kind of food Jim likes and a staggeringly long list of beers. I know he really likes the place, so I decided to suggest he meet there. I called him and suggested we meet. Surprisingly, he agreed. Since Emma was born, we had hardly exchanged a few words with each other. So I had to be very careful about this important meeting. It was a last-ditch effort to save a broken marriage. The paperwork was complete, but I believed we still had a chance. As long as we still have children, we still have a chance. And I still need one. Next chapter. Jim. I was torn between going or not going to see Laura. At the end of my internal debate, I decided I had to get over my frustration and talk to her. The kids were my first concern, and this attempt by her to talk to me could be related to something she needed to tell me. And while she could have easily relayed her concerns about the children through her attorney or even called me, I believe we could have been adults and talked face to face. So I decided to meet her at the beer barn, but I figured I'd bring some helpers with me. Next chapter. Laura. When I got to the beer barn, I saw that Jim was already there. There was another woman with him. She was blonde and very good looking. They sat across from each other. They were holding hands. Holy shit. When I approached the table, they stood up and she moved to Jim's side. The introduction was a little awkward, as you can imagine. I didn't realize there would be anyone else with him. The expression on Jim's face was calm, and he smirked slightly. I realized that my plan to convince him to come back to my bed and for me and the baby to move in with him and the kids had failed. Jim introduced the woman, Amanda. She was good-looking and, as far as I could tell, about the same age as us. She was silent, not saying a word, but watching me like a hawk watching a dainty mouse. I knew immediately that I had lost. Jim ordered me a drink and took the liberty of ordering food for all of us. He knew this Amanda well enough to know what she liked to eat. When the food was ordered and the drinks were delivered, Jim began, "So, Laura, what did you want to talk about?" I stammered and stuttered, trying to come up with some nonsense. I talked about the kids and what I wanted to do with them in the moments I have with them over the next few months. Jim told me he was planning something for Christmas and would probably take them away to a ski resort in Vermont. I just nodded and agreed with pretty much everything he said. I hadn't noticed before, but when Amanda took off her voluminous sweater, it was clear that she was pregnant. My eyes widened as I stared at her belly. Her potbelly wasn't very big, but it was there. I knew these things all too well. "Laura, I have to tell you that I'm selling the house. You'll get your half of the money after the mortgage is paid off at the bank. You see, Amanda and I are moving in together, and we've decided that we want to move to a house that better suits our needs." Jim let that message sink in, and then, with a huge smile on his face, continued. "Amanda is pregnant. We're expecting the baby in 5 months." So, the death knell for my marriage sounded, and any faint hope I still had for reconciliation evaporated before my eyes. I guess it had started when I'd first gotten into it with Jason, and then accelerated when I'd had fun with Glenn during those 4 days in Vegas. I was hoping the earth would open up and swallow me right then, but it didn't. I just nodded to them and quietly said, "I gotta go." I walked out of the restaurant and took a cab back to my apartment. I was in such a haze that I forgot my car was in the parking lot nearby. Shit. A year later. Amanda. "Okay, I think I'm going to get the last words. The new house is set up, and we have room for all the kids. We bought a house in a great neighborhood, not far from the house Jim lived in. It's even a little bigger than that one, and we put in a pool before we moved in. Between Jim, a newborn, and 4 kids, managing the house and work, I go to bed at night exhausted, but I try to be there for my husband. Yes, we are married. Jim was adamant that our children have a full married mother and father. We got married shortly before the baby was born. We still have a nanny who watches the baby when we are at work and watches the kids after school. Please know this. I learned a lesson from my first marriage. I know I was stupid and took Michael for granted. I didn't give him the respect he deserved. I will not make that mistake again. I am very devoted to my husband and family. I can't believe how happy I am right now. I am happier than I probably have any right to be. Jim is such a devoted father to all of our children. I love this man so much, and I know he loves me. 3 years ago, I had no idea things would turn out this way.